Oh, Stalin was a mighty man, and a mighty man was he. He led the Soviet people on the road to victory. All through the revolution, he fought at Lenin's side, and they made a combination till the day that Lenin died. He said, come on, you people, we must work with brain and hand. And then one day the Nazis came into the Soviet land. They plundered to the Volga, to Stalingrad. And then Joe Stalin said, come on, me boys, and kicked them out again. Oh, Stalin was a southerner, in Georgia he was born, where the oranges grow thick and fast and fields of waving corn. And Stalin is a farmer, his fingers they are green, and he has planted the biggest crop the world has ever seen. One day he looked upon the map and frowned and shook his head. There's too much brown and not enough green, these were the words he said. We'll have to change the weather, boys, he said, and then he smiled. So let's begin by planting trees along 3,000 miles. So Stalin rolled his sleeves up then and said it's time to start. The Volga River and the Don, they are too far apart. I think we'd better join them, so come and help me, pal, and we'll build a mighty waterway, the Volga-Don Canal. Then Stalin went into the north, and there saw rivers three, all emptying their waters into the polar sea. Now that's not right, Joe Stalin said, these rivers, they are ours. We'll turn them round and make them work and make electric power. There was a range of mountains that were standing in the way, so Stalin put his hand out and smoothed them all away. For Joe, he is determined to make the land all green, and that's the biggest project that the world has ever seen. Oh, Stalin is a mighty man, and he has a mighty plan. He's harnessed nature to the plow to work for the good of man. He's hammered out the future, the fortune he has seen, and he's made the worker state the best the world has ever seen.
전체의 사회 주기를 우리 어떻게 정대로 지키는가를 세계여보라. 조선은 결심하면 한다. 조선은 한다면 한다. 백성의 영도 따라서 선군의 붉은 기 그 신념으로 조선은 결심하면 한다. 조선은 한다면 한다. 조체의 강성대국을 우리 어떻게 땅에 세우는가를 세계여보라. 조선은 결심하면 한다. 조선은 한다면 한다. 장군님의 국의 뜻을 받들어 불굴의 정신력 그대 장으로 조선은 결심하면 한다. 조선은 한다면 한다.
Welcome.
조선은 결심하면 한다. 조선은 한다면 한다. Por
내겐 남팀 세력지 야우팀 나라게 대복시마 어던지니 헌칠생 어거지민 헌칠생
Le Vietnam brûle et moi je hurle Mao, Mao. Johnson rigole et moi je vole Mao, Mao. Le napalm coule et moi je roule Mao, Mao. Les villes crèvent et moi je rêve Mao, Mao. Les putains crient et moi je ris Mao, Mao. joue Mao Mao.
C'est le petit livre rouge qui fait que tout enfin bouge.
L'impérialisme dicte partout sa loi. La révolution n'est pas un dîner. La bomba est un tigre en papier. Les masses sont les véritables héros. Les ricains tuent et moi je mue Mao Mao. Les fous sont rois et moi je bois Mao Mao. Les bombes tonnent et moi je sonne Mao Mao. Les bébés fuient et moi je fuis Mao Mao. Les Russes mangent et moi je danse Mao Mao. Diable dénonce, je renonce Mao Mao.
C'est le petit livre rouge qui fait que tout enfin bouge.
La base de l'armée, c'est le soldat. Le vrai pouvoir est au bout du fusil. Les monstres seront tous anéantis. L'ennemi ne périt pas de lui-même. Mao Mao. Mao Mao. Mao Mao. Mao Mao.
Greetings, everybody, and welcome. It is the afternoon, the late afternoon, in fact, of the 21st of January, 2025, and we come to you at the beginning of a new old era. Not really, but it's nice to make dramatic pronouncements every now and again, isn't it? So today we are looking at two things, principally. The life and crimes of a certain Joseph Robinette Biden. If I went through all of his crimes, we would be here probably until this time next week. But we will be giving you some edited highlights and letting you look at Biden's career in the light of a Marxist-Leninist analysis of U.S. imperialism, and talking about how entirely appropriate it is that Biden ends his political career dishing out pardons to his own family, because this is a man who is one of the most self-serving, corrupt, depraved, bloodthirsty sociopaths to ever have served U.S. imperialism, and that is his biggest real accolade, the most significant achievement that he can actually point to. Now, before getting into some customary greetings, we will begin this look at Biden's career with a look at the words written by the late, great Alexander Cockburn, who wrote this all the way back in 2008 when then candidate Obama picked Biden to be his vice president. Now, I want to read to you a couple of paragraphs from this. Biden is a notorious flapjaw, writes Cockburn. His vanity deludes him into believing that every word that drops from his mouth is minted in the golden currency of Pericles. Vanity is the most conspicuous characteristic of US senators en bloc, nourished by deferential acolytes and often expressed in loutish sexual advances to staffers, interns, and the like. On more than one occasion, Counterpunch's editors have listened to vivid accounts by the recipient of just such advances, the staffer of another senator, being accosted by Biden in the well of the Senate in the weeks immediately following his wife's fatal car accident. Biden's experience in foreign affairs consists in absolute fidelity to the conventions of Cold War liberalism, the efficient elder brother of raffish neoconservatism. Here again, the ticket is well balanced, since Senator Obama has, within a very brief period of time, exhibited great fidelity to the same creed. Now, that's from 2008. In other writing going back to the 1980s, Coburn referred to Biden as having sawdust for brains. That was true in the 1980s. It has become more true as time has gone on. And so we turn to the career of Joe Biden. But before doing so, we will just take a quick tour through those in the comment section thus far and say our hellos. So, hello to Lombard, Rentier Oligarch, Svetlana, joining us from Moscow. Hello to you. Robeson, hello to you out there in Indonesia. Hello to Bishi out in East Anglia. Hello to Victor, Tim Gray, James Brock, Chickpea Stranded. The music will go on forever due to popular demand, to answer your question. Peter, President Jesus, Luca, Just a Maverick, Grassy Knoll, Daniel, Bruce Albert, Evan Sten, Jerry, the Wicked Witch of Southeast, Damien Farrell from Dublin, Yepex, Davey from out there in Cymru, Edward, exiled in Iceland, Chicken Pot Pie, Comrade Lee, joining us from elsewhere in Perfidious Albion, Yuan joining us from Phoenix, Arizona, Ogas Cybernetics joining us from Idaho, Almir joining us from the once and future Socialist Republic of Slovenia, Yugoslavia, Tino, Miguel Carvalho joins us from occupied Portugal. Good to have a Portuguese comrade joining us today, Miguel. Hello to Kyron Fatima and Thomas Wolf and Stig Pedersen and Severin Mikdost, and to Abtin and to Luri Faxons List, who joins us from Mordor, otherwise known as NATO-occupied Sweden. Now, thanks to everybody who has tuned in. This is going to be broadcast, indeed is being broadcast on X and YouTube, Facebook, Twitch, and Rumble. So be sure to like and share the stream if you haven't done so already, and to hit subscribe if you haven't done so already on your relevant social media platform. Also, hello to Mac Williams joining us from Tampa, Florida, a representative of the alligator wrestling state. Right, okay. Also, hello to Sun Chu, who joins us from Algeria. We have global coverage here, comrades. Greetings to you all. Again, I will ask you to like and share the stream if you haven't done so already. So, as you can see from the quote we began with from Alexander Coburn, which you can find in an old Counterpunch article from back when the Counterpunch actually published things that were good rather than the avalanche of retarded garbage that they've been indulging in more recently. So, Biden, of course, begins his career. He's slithering up the ever so greasy pole that is U.S. bourgeois politics in the late 1960s. Now, of course, we all remember his legendary encounter with Corn Pop at the public pool, where the only detail about that story that I think is entirely true is that Biden was once at a swimming pool. I certainly don't believe he was at one that wasn't segregated. Now, of course, this leads us into the first part of Biden's career, which was largely forgotten for a long time due to his association with Obama. But Biden himself brought this back up in his run for the presidency in 2019 to 2020, which is that Biden, as a new entrant to Congress, was rather fond of working with, of course, a certain group of Southern senators who were known as the Dixiecrats. These are the old Democrats from the Southern segregationist states, or I should say more accurately, drawing from the analysis of Malcolm X, the openly segregationist states, because as Malcolm X correctly pointed out, the segregation in the South is official, segregation in the North was unofficial. but could be no less deadly. So the openly segregationist senators from the South of the United States, these were Biden's first political allies. And he liked them because they didn't call him boy. There you go. And Biden frequently boasted about how he was the best friend of old Strom Thurmond. Now, if you don't know who Strom Thurmond is, I will summarize him in brief. He was one of the most fanatical racists in the U.S. Senate, and that again is up against a lot of very stiff competition for that particular title. Strom Thurmond was, of course, a senator for a very, very long time. He was a senator as early as the 1940s and served in the Senate, I believe, until his death. And I think in the late 1980s. Now, the thing about Strom Thurmond was that he was a guy who, I correct myself. Strom Thurmond, in the manner of many evil bastards, lived to be 100 years old. He only died in 2003. So, the evil truly do outlive the good in this case. But Thurmond was notorious in the 1940s for launching filibusters against anything that would threaten the system of segregation in the American southern states. And so this man, who was a veteran racist, an extreme racist, would be Biden's not only colleague, but mentor and friend, tells you everything you need to know about Joe Biden, both then and now. Biden used to introduce himself by saying that he was here to speak on behalf of Strom Thurmond. That's how close they were. Biden really liked the guy. And by your friends shall ye be known. And Biden later tried, or his people later tried in the 2019 campaign to sort of back away from this a little bit by saying that he was only interested in working with the Southern Dixiecrats on things that weren't related to segregation. But in reality, the segregation was the top of these guys' list of priorities, and it was a priority for Biden as well. See, Biden is a racist, has never stopped being a racist. Remember that one of the things he said about his association with Obama was that he was impressed by the fact that Obama was, I think the phrasing he used was like clean and well educated. So again, just shows what his baseline assumptions are to this day. And I think it's probably the period of Biden's life that he looks back on with the most fondness, if indeed he still can remember it, is that period in the 70s into the early and mid 80s, where basically a US senator, which is what Biden ultimately became, could, as the quote from Coburn indicates, get away with almost anything, get away with being a diehard racist, get away from groping or possibly raping Senate staffers. And this man, I think it's pretty easy to say, without fear of being contradicted, that Biden is a deeply depraved man. Now, this is before we even get into the details of the Ashley Biden diary. Look that up. The likes of James O'Keefe wasn't actually lying about that one. That's a real document. Go and look at what it says. I won't say what it is here, but needless to say, it's pretty fucking disturbing. This man is a depraved maniac, a pretty comprehensively established that he is a serial sexual harasser, possibly a rapist, a man who has spent his career defending the system of racial segregation in the southern United States, a man who for the rest of his career always made it clear that he was a man whose services were for sale. And he said this over and over again in his time in the US Senate, when he said that he was basically there for hire by various different corporate interests. And the corporate interest, of course, that he was most associated with in his very long career as a senator was that of the credit card industry, which, of course, was many of them were registered in Delaware, which, of course, is where he was senator from, for the purposes of their low tax and apparently very low regulation schemes. are very low bar regulation schemes that they run for credit card companies in Delaware. And Biden was their dedicated servant for 30 plus years between the early 1970s and when he becomes, of course, Obama's vice president in 2009. So let's recap. A diehard racist, a serial harasser of women, possibly a rapist, and a man who spends his time doing favors for the credit card industry, and not only the credit card industry, but the dirtiest and most regulation-free elements of the credit card industry. So, as a man who specializes in doing favors for companies that lend money to working-class people who could never afford to pay it back and sinks them into unpayable amounts of debt. So that's who Joe Biden is. Let's turn again to another domestic policy, because, of course, Joe Biden, again, as Coburn says in the opening quote we used, was a rabid supporter of every U.S. war going. Didn't matter whether it was a Democrat or a Republican in the White House, Biden was for it. Biden was for every war. Even, as Max Blumenthal has reported, even Menachem Begin was shocked by how bloodthirsty and over the top Biden was in supporting the Israeli invasion of Lebanon in the early 1980s, which, of course, was an invasion which the US stood behind, even if later on Reagan warned them to dial it down a little bit. And the US backed the Israeli invasion of Lebanon in the early 1980s because it was designed to smash the pan-Arab left socialist and communist movement to pieces, which ultimately the Israeli invasion, combined with the Lebanese civil war and the fall of the Soviet Union to counter-revolutionary forces, all combined together to at least provide a severe setback for Arab communist and socialist organizations and left nationalist organizations. Of course, the struggle for liberation did not end. It just took a different turn. But Biden, all in on the Israeli invasion of Lebanon in the early 1980s, all in on murdering anybody who got in the way of it, to the point where even Begin found him to be a bit too much. So when people say, why has Biden spent a year, 15 months now, backing the Israeli murderous rampage in Gaza and in Lebanon and elsewhere? Well, that's exactly who Biden has always been. That's exactly what you'd expect him to do. He was doing that. He was taking the same line in 1980 to 81 as he was in 2023 to 2025. So there's one thing you can't accuse Biden of, it's being inconsistent on that particular point. He's a rabid imperialist and supporter of every single dirty move the U.S. makes in other countries, and by extension, he supports the actions of the U.S.'s leading proxy forces, especially in trying to destroy oppositional movements that are oppositional to U.S. imperialism. Let us remind ourselves that the war waged by Israel against both Gaza and Lebanon was a pursuit of similar objectives than the original. Well, the Israeli invasion of Lebanon in the early 1980s. It was pursuing similar aims. In the early 1980s, it was designed to crush the largely leftist and communist resistance movements that were sheltering in Lebanon and were launching operations against Israel from there. And up to 2023, 2024, what was the reason for particularly the war against Lebanon? It was, and also the war on Gaza. These were wars, or one war that was designed by the US imperialists to completely crush the revolutionary nationalist element of Hamas and the Lebanese national liberation movement headed by Hezbollah. So it's the same aim. So why wouldn't Biden back it? This is what he's done for his entire wretched career. And as Comrade Daniel points out in the chat, we do have one thing to thank Biden for from his career in the 1980s, which is where he, because he was so rabidly in favor of the actions of the Israeli regime, he actually ended up inadvertently telling the truth, because he said at one point that if there were not an Israel, we would need to create an Israel in order to secure our interests in the region. I paraphrase slightly, but that's what Biden said. And again, that's Biden, because he's so in love with the sound of his own voice and thinks that he's a genius, inadvertently giving the game away. So Biden, racist, rabid imperialist, enemy of the working class in the United States. And that's just the opening gambit in this particular episode. Biden's other crimes, of course, do knit together his major obsessions. His major obsession with, of course, being his rabid support for all the actions of US imperialism, and also his, I think it's fair to say, unrestrained loathing for those who he considers to be below him in the social order inside the United States, particularly black men, who I don't think I'm being particularly controversial when I say that Biden does have a particular loathing for black Americans, especially working class black Americans. You know, rich ones he can get on board with them, but working class black Americans, working class Hispanic Americans, in fact, fuck it, just the entire American working class, Biden has a loathing for. The racial minority elements of it, probably he reserves special loathing for them, but essentially Biden's a man who hates the class that he always has claims to have an association with. Now, Biden became infamous, I think it's fair to say, partially because of his failed presidential run in the 1988 presidential campaign. Biden initially ran and then suffered an ignominious failure due to the fact that he was exposed as having been plagiarizing various people, including, of course, no one's favorite Welshman, a certain Mr. Neil Kinnock, or as we should say, the Baron Kinnock of Bedwellty. Don't even know if that's a real place, but I'm told reliably that it is. But the Baron Kinnock, of course, was back then plain old Neil Kinnock, a man who came, much like Biden, originally came from the working class, only to spend an entire career delivering the most stinking and rotten betrayals of the working class. So it's entirely appropriate that Biden would plagiarize Kinnock, because Kinnock gave this speech, which is awful, in the, I think it was the 87 general election campaign here, which Kinnock, by the way, lost quite heavily, where Kinnock said, "I'm the first Kinnock in 1,000 generations to go to university." That was the way that Kinnock spoke, which is sort of over the top, blathering nonsense. And there's no wonder Biden wanted to plagiarize him. And the two men are cut from completely the same cloth. So Biden ripped that speech off, got exposed of having done it, got exposed also for having lied about his qualifications, and essentially disappeared for a while before staging a comeback in the early 1990s, because he was, of course, chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee in charge of confirming Supreme Court justices. Now, this is a particularly bitterly ironic detail, because one of the justifications that the American left, particularly the DSA and associated creatures of the DSA, were using this justification for backing Biden in 2020 was that, well, we got to have a Democratic president in order to control nominations to the Supreme Court. And of course, their justification was, oh, well, you know, the only way we can defend abortion rights is by having a Democratic president who will appoint pro Roe v. Wade justices. Now, of course, they completely ignored or tried to elide the consequences of Biden's own time as chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, which is that Biden, when he was in that position, not only confirmed the likes of Clarence Thomas and others, he also helped cover up for Clarence Thomas. When Clarence Thomas was accused of sexual harassment, of course, by Anita Hill, Biden helped him cover it up. Now, I wonder why Biden felt an association with the future Justice Thomas. Could it be that these are two deeply corrupt, seedy men who were, shall we say, had certain predilections which they shared. So much so that Biden could see past his undoubtedly visceral loathing of Black Americans into forming a certain, seeing Thomas as a certain kindred spirit. So Biden helped Clarence Thomas get out of the hole that was being dug for him by the Anita Hill allegations. Biden also helped to get Samuel Alito confirmed, again, as Coburn notes in his article from 2008. So Biden has been an active participant in making sure that anti-abortion reactionary Supreme Court justices nominated by the Republican Party get confirmed. And yet you have these utter cretins in the DSA, in PSL, and in other stinking places of treachery and perfidy known as the American left. These clowns were running around in 2020 telling you had to back Biden because he was going to be nominating progressive justices to the Supreme Court. You know, given that his entire career had been largely built on his doing the opposite of that, and proudly doing the opposite of that. Now, this, of course, leads us to other things that Biden has done. And I'm beginning to regret doing this program on this particular question because it comes clear I could be talking for 6 hours. If I have to nip out for several shots of whiskey to keep me going, please do excuse me. But we will continue. Biden, of course, and this is something which he would later try to back away from, but not really being successful at backing away from it. Biden was the guy who was the principal mover and a proud defender of the so-called crime bill in 1994. Now, let's just give a little bit of background to those who aren't American about the context in which this crime bill existed, which is that in the throughout the 1980s, you see the crack wave spread out across the United States, which is, of course, the devastating consequences to working class communities in the United States of the coming of crack cocaine into the US. And of course, we should remind ourselves, given what we're going to be talking about with a certain Mr. Trump later on, where does crack cocaine in large part originate from? It originates from cocaine smuggled into the United States by whom? Well, it's our old friends, the Contras, the Nicaraguan Contras, a CIA army, CIA terrorist army that operated inside Nicaragua to try and destroy the Sandinista revolution, and who were financing themselves by selling cocaine to LA street gangs. That is not speculation, that is proven, and the CIA was later forced to admit to it and apologize for it. This was, of course, demonstrated in the heroic reporting of a certain Gary Webb, who was mysteriously found dead in his apartment, having shot himself twice in the head. Now, I'm not fully au fait with how firearms work, especially post-mortem, but I think after shooting yourself in the head once, I don't think you're going to be in a condition to shoot yourself in the head twice. It's always been, I think, reasonable speculation on some people's part that Webb was murdered by person or persons known, I think it's fair to say, because he exposed this scam, this horrific act by the CIA, this horrific act of brutal cynicism that they engaged in, which was starting through the mass sale of cocaine via the Contra drug smuggling rackets, the starting of the crack wave in the United States. And as it always goes with these things, the state starts a drug problem, just as they had been doing in the 1960s and early 1970s, where Nixon, of course, who I'm sure that Biden admired, though, of course, Nixon was a hell of a lot smarter than Biden. Nixon declared a war on drugs, despite the fact that the US state machine itself was actively promoting drug usage. Biden later on declared war against the consequences of a crack wave, which, of course, the starting point for it was a war against the Sandinistas and the need to fund that war that caused the mass influx of cocaine into the United States, which fueled the crack wave in the first place. So Biden, following Nixon well, of course, he didn't write it, but presenting the crime bill to the American Congress, was banging on about, we need to crack down, lock people up, etc., etc. Of course, Biden wasn't going to mention, maybe didn't even know, maybe didn't even understand, who knows, the fact that a huge part of the reason for increased drug-related violence was the very fact that the crack epidemic had been started by, of course, the actions ultimately of the US government itself. And Biden then unleashes this series of laws and sentencing regulations, which condemn often non-violent drug offenders to very lengthy terms in prison, on the basis of, we need to crack down on this drug-based violence, which they, of course, that is the American state machine, caused itself. And Biden was the front man presenting this thing, and he remained very, very proud of it for a long time, as did Hillary Clinton. Remember her super predator speech. I mean, this cost Clinton in the end, and it ultimately did cost Biden. But they got away with this for a very long time. And the career of Biden in his presenting of the crime bill as the solution to drug violence should be remembered, in that Biden was all in favor of the war that caused increased drug smuggling into the United States, sponsored by the CIA. Biden then presented a bill to the Congress, which ultimately saw the American state try to tidy up the consequences of its own actions by throwing gigantic numbers of Black American men in prison. And then Biden later on, of course, delivers a pardon to his own crackhead son. Now, this is, of course, absolutely fitting for the career of the man who is under discussion. So Biden, let's now repeat this like an old school catechism. Biden, deep, horrific racist, rabid supporter of US imperialism, rabid supporter of genocidal wars, rabid supporter of throwing poor working class Americans in prison, and a rabid supporter of essentially drug trafficking. And now, and of course, on top of all of that, degenerated, pervert, serial groper, possible rapist. Here's your president, Democratic Socialists of America. Then again, knowing the reputation of the DSA, perhaps there are reasons why they feel a certain kinship to Biden. Who knows? Moving on. Biden, of course, is, just before we move on, I should add into this again, into the mix that we must repeat, Biden also employee of the most ruthless elements of the credit card industry in the United States as well. So, corporate tool on top of everything else. Moving on now properly. Biden, of course, is a man who's been associated, as I implied earlier, with with rabid support for any U.S. war that pops up, be it the Contra War in the 1980s, be it the actions of the U.S. in fueling the Iran-Iraq war, be it the Israeli invasion of Lebanon, which of course would have taken place as an action that the U.S. would have ultimately been behind. And of course, as we come into the 1990s, a rabid supporter of the war on Iraq, the sanctions on Iraq, the later invasion of Iraq, a rabid supporter of the destruction of Yugoslavia in the mid and late 1990s, a rabid supporter of, and here we get to the big one, the various different color revolutions and coups engaged in by the United States in the period since the turn of the 20th into the 21st century. And this brings us, of course, to Biden's activities in Ukraine. Biden was, of course, a man who was on the scene when the Maidan regime was created. He visited it shortly afterwards for the first time. He was a man who, of course, due to his extreme delusions and being high on his own supply of bullshit, went to Russia and basically tried to tell Vladimir Putin that he shouldn't run again for president. This is back in 2012, when Biden was seen to be the man on the spot dealing with Russian affairs. So the Obama ever trusted him with that basically tells you all you need to know about Obama's judgment. Now, Biden not only tried to tell Putin what to do, and of course failed, he tried to take charge of the US policy in Ukraine. And here we get to Biden's very well-established career of total corruption. Biden was, of course, openly seeking payouts from various different Ukrainian oligarchical interests in return for doing them favors in the American government. Nothing particularly controversial in me saying that. This is all very well established. Biden, and this again came out in 2019, was openly boasting of his corrupt activities, openly boasting about the fact that he got a Viktor Shokin, I think his name was, a Ukrainian prosecutor who was investigating Burisma, which of course Hunter the crackhead was employed by Burisma on tens of thousands of pounds a month for doing fuck all, except of course delivering money to who? Well, the big guy, according to Hunter Biden, 10% for the big guy. Who's the big guy? Joe Biden. Biden was caught red-handed, pretty much, firing somebody who was investigating a corrupt energy company that employed his heinous bastard of a son, and who, along with Biden's brother, was funneling money directly to the big guy himself, Joe Biden. This was all pretty well established by 2019, and yet, of course, the bourgeois press, once the Democrats had decided that Biden was the man and he was going to be their nomination, closed ranks and refused to, of course, discuss this story in any detail at all, which is why they covered up the Hunter Biden laptop scandal, why they refused to cover it, why it was buried in the bourgeois media, and why, of course, there were no consequences for Hunter Biden, despite having been caught red-handed and read other things as well, in terms of his activities with prostitutes, strippers, drug dealers. The man has been basically living a life that comes out of like the darker passages of Selby Jr.'s Last Exit to Brooklyn. Hunter Biden is like the sort of the living embodiment of like all of his father's vices without any of his father's skill at covering them up. But he got away with it. He's got away with the fact that he was acting as his father's bagman for many, many years. And Biden was by no means alone in using Ukraine to make money off of, to enrich himself personally. Now, if we turn to the question of like, well, why was it that Biden was spending his last hours in the presidency doling out pardons for various different people? And here it's just worth pausing on those pardons, or some of them, to see what they could mean. So he pardoned his brother James Biden and his wife Sarah, Biden's sister Valerie and her husband John Owens, his brother Francis. He's already pardoned, of course, his wretched son Hunter. So why is it then that Biden's relatives would need the presidential pardon for their activities over the last decade? Why is that? Why did a lot of these pardons start where the Ukraine crisis began, or its current iteration began in 2014? It seems to me pretty straightforward. All of them were involved in getting Biden payoffs from various Ukrainian oligarchs and moving the money around for him. And any halfway decent investigation into their financial activities would have revealed that. James Biden, Biden's brother, was already heavily implicated in moving money from the Burisma scam in Ukraine to Biden personally. And he was also implicated in trying to secure payments from sources in China as well for Biden. So that's why these people, Biden's relatives, are being pardoned. They're being pardoned because they've been engaged in the process of actually funneling money around the United States in from external sources to make sure that it gets to, of course, the big guy's bank account. And this is why they have been pardoned. And then you've also got a certain Dr. Anthony Fauci. Now, why might he need a presidential pardon? The answer for that one, I think, is fairly straightforward, and it's not just related to COVID. Fauci was a career bureaucrat at the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases and at the National Institutes of Health. He was there for 40 years. So it's not just COVID that Fauci needs cover on. It's all kinds of heinous crap, including Fauci's association with the biolabs run in other countries that were exposed partially by the now murdered Russian General Karelin and also by Victoria Nuland herself. Also, Mark Milley has been given a pardon. For what? I can't quite be sure. You don't get to be chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff without committing a few crimes. But maybe Milley's nervous about Trump, I don't know, going after him for some reason or another. He's also pardoned the members of the January the 6th committee and all of its staff. Now, that's an interesting one. And I think it's just worth pausing for a moment on that, because the January the 6th committee was an obvious attempt to, by certain factions within the US political establishment, to make sure that Trump couldn't come back into the presidency again. They were trying desperately to link him to conspiracies around the riot that took place in the Capitol building 4 years ago. Incidentally, 4 years ago was the first time that the predecessor to this program went to regular podcasting. Interesting anniversary that we're on today. I hadn't even realized it until just now. So this attempt to stitch up Trump and stitch up the presidential election ended in failure because Trump hadn't organized that riot. I mean, Trump's barely got enough organization in his within his capacities to get himself out of bed and painted up orange in the morning. Organizing a complex maneuver like some sort of coup in the United States isn't something that Trump's capable of doing, nor are most of the people around him. But this was the charge that the January the 6th committee was trying to prove. And the fact that they not only couldn't prove it, but couldn't even come up with a creative lie about it shows just how inept these people really were, and that there was nothing there for them to grab hold of. Trump basically just spent his time in those rallies that turned into a riot 4 years ago, babbling on about how the election had been stolen from him, but not actually doing anything, not actually planning anything. As far as Trump was concerned, he'd said a few words and that was enough. And so it is doubtless the case that the January 6th committee members are feeling a little nervous that Trump might fancy some payback, and hence that's why the pardon's been given. All paints a very nasty picture, of course, of Biden as this sordid, totally corrupt individual who is using the power of the presidential pardon to actually cover up his own crimes. And this is entirely fitting with Biden's entire career as a deeply unserious, in so many respects, intellectual make-weight, as Coburn says, a sawdust-brained flapjaw, a man who has committed all kinds of crimes, both political and personal, in order to serve the interests of US imperialism, but also serve his own sordid desires. Joe Biden's miserable 50-plus year-long career in US bourgeois politics finally comes to an end. And it comes to an end in a series of squalid arse-covering maneuvers. And it couldn't end on a more appropriate note. And with that, we will turn to some questions from the audience. So thank you, everybody who's tuned in so far. We have 488 of you watching. That's 304 on Twitter X, 184 on YouTube, some more probably on Rumble. I don't get a readout from those numbers. So again, if you're new to the show, welcome along. Be sure to like and share the stream if you haven't done so already. So let's scroll up to near the top and see what we are looking at here. So where did we leave off before? Okay, we've got Alexander Lukta here who says, people looked at me funny when I said Biden was objectively a bigger criminal than Trump, voting for every war, free strike legislation, racist war on drugs laws, thousands in prison, God knows how many dead. Yeah, Biden's way worse than Trump in terms of actual crimes he's committed, because he's been in power for far longer. Now, Trump, I'm sure, would have clocked up as many crimes had he been a senator, but he wasn't. So yeah, Biden is the bigger criminal by far. Hello to Jeremy Turner, who joins us from New York City. Bruce Albert says school busing program rejected by Biden. This is a program to mix children from rich and poor school districts. Yeah, of course he rejected that. Alex Oliveira says poor kids are just as bright as white kids. Sleepy Joe Biden. Yeah, Biden when he was mentally flailing and fading in the 2019 to 2020 presidential campaign, did come up with some real corkers. Greetings to John McNichol, who joins us, and to Manuel Llaneras, who joins us from Atlanta. Who else do we got here? Hello to Kent, who's joined us, and we've got a comment here from Almir, who says Bernie told everyone Biden is the most progressive president since FDR. Of course, Bernie did that. Bernie's been taking a dive on behalf of the Democratic Party establishment for his entire political career, certainly post 1990. Right, who else have we got here again? President Jesus says Crystal Ball has declared America a fascist country this morning because it now meets the official definition. So let me get this straight. Is Crystal Ballbag really saying that between Joe Biden's formal ceasing to be president and Trump's becoming president, there was a sudden shift into open fascism? Well, that just shows why you shouldn't take anything that the Crystal Ball and her non-husband, Mr. Kyle Kalinske, have to say about anything. Because if your analysis is that America became fascist, what was it in Trump's first term, then ceased to be fascist for Biden's term, and now has become fascist again? Is that Crystal Ball's argument? Well, that's an incredibly stupid, shallow, and pathetic clout-chasing so-called analysis. And I don't think she actually believes it for a second, by the way. Now, there's an awful lot to say about the nature of the internal regimes of imperialist countries. But there's an awful lot to say there that has nothing to do with like the ravings and clout-chasing of Crystal Ball. Look, in internal repression and external criminality in imperialist countries is the norm. And the roots of fascism, of course, are very much in the bourgeois system. It's just that the fascist regime is brought in as an emergency regime to save capitalism from imminent destruction via internal collapse or revolution. Now, the US imperialists have problems, very significant problems, which they have brought in Trump to try and manage for them. But unfortunately, we are not at the point where they're going to turn openly to a fascist regime. This is the Trump second term is going to be seeing an awful lot of continuity with the Biden term, because even though we've just spent a considerable period of the program going through all of Biden's crimes, or what a certain selection of them, at least not all of them, it must be emphasized that the US acts as it does. US imperialism acts as it does, not because Joe Biden is a sleazy scumbag. That helps, but the continuity from various different presidents or through various different presidencies into another presidency is what should be emphasized. There's a direct line of continuity post collapse of the USSR, from George H.W. Bush to William Jefferson Clinton to George W. Bush to Obama to Trump to Biden, back to Trump again. And those are the priorities of American imperialism which stand out. And it is the job of a president to service those priorities. Now, of course, certain presidents have more autonomy to act than others. I don't think Bill Clinton ever defied any orders given to him by the ruling class. George W. Bush was just a pure servant of the ruling class. Obama periodically would think that something was a bad idea, but he'd do it anyway. Trump threatened to go rogue, but never really did. And now Trump is firmly under the control of the establishment forces within the Republican Party and within the American state machine. He has merged with them. He has merged his movement with them. And they are, of course, taking on lead roles in his administration. Now, defenders of Trump will scream and wail and cry and say that the Trump is making peace in Ukraine, etc., etc. Trump is making peace in Gaza. What Trump is doing is he is, of course, loyally reflecting, as we have said before, the priorities of imperialism. Now, the priority of US imperialism when it comes to Ukraine, when it comes to also Gaza, was that they had now, these priorities, of course, needed to change because they had tried various different experiments and these had not worked, or at least had not worked out in the way that the US ruling class had thought that they would. And so, therefore, you need to change things up, and you change things up by essentially withdrawing ruling class support for the Democrats for now till they sort themselves out, giving it to Trump, which is why, of course, you see all the tech gurus who were at the Trump inauguration yesterday. Not just Musk, of course, giving it the old Sieg Heil, but of course you get Zuckerberg, you have the guy from Google there, and you have Bezos as well, all of whom, by the way, make quite a considerable amount of money through their connections with the US government and providing services to the US government. So they are there to secure certain investments. It's also worth emphasizing that the US military co-develops a lot of the technologies that, or originated a lot of the technologies that these companies make their money off. So there's a heavy association between the Pentagon and a lot of the tech companies, especially something like Google, which was started in part through grants and development done by DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects. So the move by the US to downscale its involvement in certain wars and upscale them in other places is standard imperial management when things go wrong. Now, to go back to Crystal Ball's statements, well, Biden, and again, look at Biden's career. Biden was not only in charge of two horrendous blood-soaked wars, both in Gaza and Ukraine, and the war in Lebanon, of course, but Biden was also in charge of all kinds of domestic repression involving also jailing political opponents. The attempt to, of course, ban and to imprison the leadership of the Uhuru movement, the attempt at clamping down on First Amendment rights on in online forums, the attempt to criminalize speech. These are all legacies of the Biden administration. So at what point, how do we then say that if Crystal Ball's analysis is that America becomes fascist because Donald Trump is committed to reactionary things on policies X, Y, and Z? Well, given how much continuity there is from Obama to Trump to Biden and back to Trump again, why is it that it's only Trump that gets tarred with the fascism brush there? If your argument is that the American system is fascist, then it doesn't become fascist just because Trump becomes president, given that he's left the office before, despite the melodramatics of January the 6th, and will leave office again. So why is it that Biden is spared the fascism moniker that is applied to Trump, given that there is a large amount of continuity between the two? The answer is, of course, that Crystal Ball's allegations are not serious. She doesn't take them seriously, and neither should we. This kind of like ridiculous hyperbole needs to be just rejected, really. Who else we got here? Sea of Kronos says, as one who remembers Kinnock from the time, it was a good impression. As Kinnock said in 1992 when he thought he was going to win, we're all right. Then he lost the election immediately after having said that. Hello to Robert out there in what's described as the wasteland of Staten Island. Even Sten says, it is hilarious that he chose to pardon his son for a crime for which he lobbied for a mandatory 5-year prison sentence, possession of a small quantity of crack cocaine. Yeah, under Biden's own rules, his son should have done 5 years at least. Alexander Luchter didn't like the Neil Kinnock impression. He says, sounds like what Gary McInnes is doing when he LARPs his cartoonish Scotsman persona with his alcoholism roughed voice. I didn't realize McInnes was now LARPing as a Scotsman. Then again, not exactly a surprise. Svetlana asks, Biden, Kinnock, Starmer, and a host of others, what is it about mainstream so-called leftists that they are so obsessed with social status and sell out their class for it? Well, you've answered your question there in the asking of it itself. For many people, like, it's Kinnock and Starmer, Biden, politics is a way of climbing a social ladder, which is the only thing that many of them value. And that's the reason why they do what they do. They're men who are entirely devoid of principle, who are just interested in shimmying up the greasy pole. And you get to do that by essentially being from the working class, but acting as a scab to the working class, turning on the working class, doing the service of the ruling class. And again, you should use the word scab on them because that's exactly what they are. Men born into working class families who take advantage of the ruling class's need for essentially managers and overseers by becoming the worst sellouts imaginable. These people are despicable, disgusting, degenerate buffoons. Right. Yebek says, speaking of the Iran-Contra affair, have you heard of the octopus murders conspiracy? How an investigative journalist discovered a huge web of lies and collusion who was killed before he went public. Not heard of the octopus murders. Doesn't surprise me that somebody was offed over Iran-Contra, though. Irish Partisan says, Twitter and X is full of liberals in absolute meltdown, equating Trump with Hitler, oblivious to the fact that Biden was a lot worse. Well, Biden's got a lot more blood in his hands. Hello to James Goblin, who joins us from the once and future Yugoslavia. Alexander Luchter says, watch 1996 Hillary Clinton on Super Predators, aka Troubled Youth, aka Black Children. Yes. Sea of Kronos says, Pelosi and Romney's sons were also employed by Burisma. Yes, indeed they were. Apparently, so says President Jesus, Crystal Ball cites Elon Musk doing the old Sieg Heil as proof that America has slid into fascism. Well, Crystal Ball has no brain. There you go. Jerry points out that it's 101 years since the death of Lenin. Lenin lived, Lenin lives, Lenin will live. We must repeat that. Right. S.W. Haster says, you can add genocider in chief. He could have ended the massacre with one phone call, but refused to do it. Well, yes, and exactly for the reasons that I pointed out in the monologue there, which is that Biden, as a dedicated servant of U.S. imperialism, had an active interest in making sure that all resistance forces are destroyed by Israel on behalf of U.S. imperialism. Comrade Lee points out correctly that I missed something off, which is that Biden was also leading the way in breaking the national railway strike 2 years ago, which is correct. Biden did that. And again, this is the man who the various American socialist outfits said should be voted for. So Biden carried out the largest single act of strike breaking in the United States in over 30 years. Scrolling through some more comments here. They don't call him Jim Crow Joe Biden for nothing, says Solomon. Yes. Okay, so we are now just coming up to the 6 o'clock mark, and I want to just move now to a look at a couple of things that Trump himself did yesterday. Now, we're going to be talking about this in more detail with our comrade and friend Kit Clarenberg, who will be joining us tomorrow at midday British time so far. to look at the various stories coming out of the decline and fall, quite literally, of the Anglo-American Empire. But I wanted to mention this now because this has been floating around for years, and now Trump's done it. So Trump yesterday signed an executive order, January 20th, 2025, entitled the following: designated cartels and other organizations as foreign terrorist organizations and specially designated global terrorists. Now, this does essentially what we have talked about on numerous occasions on this channel, which is using legal means or sort of semi-legal means to classify the drug cartels as a terrorist organization. And one of the things that one of the laws that is cited by this executive order is a law passed in September 23rd, 2001, related to prohibiting terrorism. So, what the justification for this is as follows. So, the wording of this executive order, which of course Trump didn't write, Trump just signed it. He likes signing things. Their justification for classifying the cartels as terrorist organizations is as follows. A, the drug cartels are international cartels that constitute a national security threat beyond that posed by traditional organized crime, with activities encompassing 1.1, convergence between themselves and a range of extra-hemispheric actors, from designated foreign terror organizations to antagonistic foreign governments. 2, complex adaptive systems, characteristic of entities engaged in insurgency and asymmetric warfare. And point 3, infiltration into foreign governments across the Western Hemisphere. Now, when I read those 3 points there, I think it sounded much more like they were describing the CIA than any Mexican drug dealing operation. It's because essentially those are all things that the CIA does. But what this does is it opens the path for military action that can be taken against targets inside Mexico without the need for much or any, in fact, consultation of the House of Representatives and the Senate in the United States, because by classifying the Mexican drug cartels as terrorist organizations, Trump can, in theory, use the authorization of the use of military force, which dates all the way back to 2001, to justify launching assaults on what's described as the drug cartels. Now, I'm reading a very interesting book at the moment entitled "The Drug Cartels Do Not Exist," which argues against the conventional narrative on that, and I will be giving a report on that once I've done with the reading of it. But the essential point here is the reason why this has come up, and the reason why it was being kicked around 6 years ago, including by people like Pete Buttigieg, that the U.S. Ruling class fear that they are losing control over Mexico. When you had the AMLO presidency, now you have the Scheinbaum presidency, who's proceeding in a similar fashion. And there's a reason why the U.S. ruling class is now ringing the bell over alleged terroristic elements inside Mexico. It's because what they want to do is to give themselves 2 things. 1, pressure points on the Mexican government to try and convince them to act more in a way that's in line with U.S. ruling class interests, but also that they want to have the option to carry out some kind of military campaign inside Mexico, allegedly to target the cartels. But we all know what the actual agenda will be, which will be using military intervention to essentially destabilize Mexico and to retard its progress that it has been made in the AMLO and the Scheinbaum era, and to spread terror and fear inside Mexico itself. This is all what this is designed to do. Remember that this dates back over 2 decades to the institution of a so-called war on drugs in Mexico, I believe it was President Calderon, done at the order of the U.S. imperialists, which caused a gigantic amount of violence and thousands of deaths. Now, what Trump and co are proposing is something which goes beyond even that. So this feeds in and fits in completely with the idea, and I think it's no longer just an idea, that with the war in Ukraine and the war in Gaza having gone bad, that there is an imperative exists for the US imperialists to reassert themselves. And how are they going to reassert themselves? They're going to reassert themselves by actually committing acts of militarist aggression against neighboring countries. This is certainly what seems to be the case when it comes to the government in Mexico, which is passing beyond the control, so the US fears, of themselves. And so what better way to derail it than unleashing a war inside Mexico itself? That's the agenda here. And so when you see somebody making excuses for Trump and babbling on about why he'll be so great, well, remind them of this, because this is what Trump's really been brought in to do, shit like this. So be aware of that. Be aware of the fact also that there's going to be a whole range of things which the Trump administration is going to do, which, of course, the official left in the United States will run around and scream about, but, of course, make no effective attempt at actually organizing real resistance. So Trump enters into the scene. Biden leaves it for a ill-deserved retirement. He should be seeing out his years in prison. So I will be now just pausing for to take in some more comments. So we have Pavel, who asks, do you have some communist contacts in Austria? I only find here Trot or Kautsky types at best. I don't personally, but I can have a look, Pavel. If you want to email me with that question at the regular email address, you can find it on the blurb underneath the video with that question. I'll have a look for you, see if I can put you in touch with anybody. Greetings to Eduardo in Lambeth. Greetings to Dingo Ate Me Baby, who's on Rumble. General Pershing, says Grassy Knoll, who was the U.S. World War I general in Europe, led the U.S. Army to Mexico going after Pancho Villa. Yeah, so it would hardly even be the first time that they've done stuff like this, but it's first time in living memory for most of us. So thanks to all 534 of you watching at the moment. And we will just take a couple more comments here. Edward asks how to respond to people who say that Kamala, Biden, Obama were 1,000% better than Trump because of fascism. I would say that such people should examine what Biden and Obama really did in office. The quickest way to disproving that Trump is that much different is to just put Obama's second term and Trump's first term next to each other and just compare the really important things that both of them did. And you'll find a large degree of consensus there. It's really stupid to say that because of the election of Trump, America is now fascist. It's such a shallow and ridiculous analysis. It's hard to not laugh at it, really. But yes, just compare stuff that Trump did, stuff that Obama did, the real stuff, like the arming of the Syrian rebels, like the sponsoring of the coup in Egypt, like the fanatical support for Israel, all of which, of course, continues under Trump, and that's the biggest condemnatory factor for this particular system. Okay, so I'm going to draw things to a close for today. Thanks to all 539 of you watching at the moment. I hope you have enjoyed this career down the foul highways and byways of Joe Biden's career. I'll be back with you again tomorrow with the latest in the Stalin series on the opposition. Please join me again for that one. But until then, I will also remind you to watch the latest episode of Decline and Fall, which will be out at around about 7 p.m. tomorrow. Till then, everybody, thank you for tuning in. And thanks to everybody who supports the show on Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee. You make the work on this possible. I'll be back with you again tomorrow. Please join me then. But until we return, here's some music.
When I was young I used to be as fine a man as ever you'd see. And the Prince of Wales, he said to me, come and join the British Army. Tooraloo, they're looking for monkeys up in the zoo. It says, one, if I had a face like you, I joined the British Army. Sarah Connon baked a cake, and so for poor old Slattery sake, sure I threw myself into the lake, pretending I was barmy. Tooraloo, I've made me mind up what to do. Now I'll work me ticket home to you and the British Army. Sergeant Healy went away and his wife got in the family way, and the only words that she could say was blame the British Army. Tooraloo, me curse upon the Labour blue that took me darling boy from me to join the British Army. Corporal Sheen is a terrible note, just give him a couple of jars of stout and he beat the enemy with his mouth and save the British Army. Tooraloo, I've made me mind up what to do. Now I'll work me ticket home to you and the British Army.